If only you had Sarah's ambition, we wouldn't worry about you. The words drifted over the risotto, landing softly between the crystal wine glasses and the flickering candles. My mother Christina sighed as she said them, a delicate, practiced exhale that suggested she was the one carrying a burden, not inflicting one. Across the table, my sister Sarah laughed, scrolling through her phone, barely registering the insult. "She's just focused," Mom Sarah murmured without looking up. "Not everyone is cut out for the spotlight." I looked down at my plate. The antique silver fork felt heavy in my hand. Under the table, my phone buzzed a confirmation notification. The transfer had gone through. $2,350. My monthly contribution to the family mortgage. A payment I had made faithfully for 42 months. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my wine. I didn't even argue. Instead, I unlocked my phone. I opened my banking app. I scrolled past the transfer success notification to the scheduled payments tab. My finger hovered over the edit button for a fraction of a second. Then I tapped delete. A small pop-up asked me to confirm. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transaction?" I tapped yes. The screen refreshed. No upcoming payments scheduled. I locked my phone and placed it face down on the linen tablecloth. I took a sip of the Pinot Noir my father had opened, a bottle I knew I had paid for. It tasted like copper and finality. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm done worrying." Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Have you ever been the invisible wallet in your family? I'd love to know who's part of our community. The drive back to my apartment was silent. No radio. No podcasts. Just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the cold, hard math running through my head. I let myself into my rental. It was a cramped one-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where the heating rattled and the windows drafted in the winter. I stood in the middle of the living room, leaving the lights off, letting the street lamps outside cut shapes across the floor. I walked over to my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark, illuminating the spreadsheet I had kept hidden for 3.5 years. Column A, date. Column B, amount. I scrolled to the bottom. The sum was bolded, $98,500. I stared at that number. 98,000. That wasn't just money. That was a down payment on a condo. That was a master's degree. That was a decade of travel I had never taken. For 42 months, I had sent $2,350 to my parents. Every single month. Like clockwork. Like a tax for existing. People always ask why. Why would a smart woman, a data analyst who finds discrepancies for a living, let herself be bled dry for so long? Why didn't I stop at the first insult? Why didn't I stop when I saw my sister Sarah buying designer handbags while I was buying generic brand pasta? In economics, there is a concept called the sunk cost fallacy. It's the trap where you keep investing in a failing project simply because you've already put so much into it. You tell yourself, "I can't walk away now. I've already spent too much. If I just invest a little more, it will finally turn a profit." That's what I was doing. I wasn't paying for their mortgage. I wasn't paying for the repairs on the brownstone. I was paying for permission. I was paying for the right to sit at that dinner table and not be invisible. I thought that if I became the infrastructure of their lives, they couldn't evict me. I thought that if I made myself essential, eventually they would have to value me. I treated my love like a venture capital investment in a startup that was bleeding cash, convinced that one day the dividend would come. One day my mother would look at me and say, "Thank you." One day my father would say, "We couldn't have done this without you." I was waiting for the ROI on my own family. But tonight, as the cursor blinked on the spreadsheet, I finally admitted the truth. There was no dividend coming, there was no profit share. My parents weren't a struggling startup, they were a Ponzi scheme. They were taking my capital and paying out dividends of adoration to Sarah, the golden child, who had never invested a dime. I sat there for a long time, the blue lights stinging my eyes. I realized I had been buying a ticket to a show that I wasn't even allowed to watch. I was the producer funding the entire production, while Sarah stood center stage taking the bows. And tonight they had looked me in the eye and told me I lacked ambition. Me, the one funding their lifestyle. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. It was dry and sharp. Ambition. They wanted ambition. Fine. I closed the laptop. I didn't go to bed. I didn't cry into my pillow. I went to the closet and pulled out a suitcase. I opened it on the floor. I started with the books, then the clothes, then the few framed photos I had on the shelf. I moved with the precision of a machine. Fold, stack, pack. This wasn't a tantrum. I wasn't running away. I was liquidating my assets. I was closing a division that had been operating at a loss for decades. I worked through the night. By the time the sun began to turn the sky gray over the city, my apartment was nothing but boxes. I stood by the window looking out at the skyline. I felt lighter than I had in years. The anchor was gone. The debt was cleared. I was technically homeless, emotionally bankrupt, and alone. But for the first time in my life, I was solvent. The first of the month arrived on a Tuesday. I sat in my new office, a corner suite on the 24th floor of a glass tower in the Seaport District. Below me, the harbor was a slate of gray steel dotted with white boats. The view was expansive, expensive, and cold. Exactly what I needed. At 9 a.m, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my bank app. Scheduled. Transfer failed. I smiled, took a sip of my espresso, and went back to my data visualization dashboard. 5 minutes later, the text started. First, my father. Savannah, did you change banks? The transfer didn't come through. 10 minutes later, my mother. Your father is trying to pay the landscapers. Please check your account, sweetie. It must be a glitch. I didn't reply. I didn't even open the messages. I let them pile up on the lock screen like junk mail. By noon, the tone had shifted. Mother, this isn't funny. Sarah is trying to coordinate the caterers for next month, and we need to clear these invoices. Call me immediately. Sarah, hey, Mom says you're ghosting them. Seriously, I'm in a meeting with Vogue right now. I don't have time for your drama. Just fix it. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and focused on my work. I was building a predictive model for a fintech client, analyzing patterns of fraudulent spending. It was soothing work. The numbers didn't lie. They didn't gaslight, they just revealed the truth in black and white. That evening, I stood on my balcony, the wind whipping my hair around my face. I felt like I was standing in the eye of a hurricane. Behind me in my old life, the storm was raging. My parents were panicking not because they missed me, but because their infrastructure was collapsing. Without my monthly injection of capital, the leaks in their lifestyle were starting to show. But here in my glass fortress, it was quiet. I had used the money I saved the first 3 months of mortgage payments I hadn't sent to secure this lease. It was expensive, yes, but it came with a doorman who didn't let anyone up without permission. It came with a security system. It came with silence. I realized then that I hadn't just moved apartments. I had changed jurisdictions. I was no longer operating under their laws. The next 3 months were a masterclass in silence. I blocked their numbers during work hours. I filtered their emails to a folder labeled Audit. I didn't visit. I didn't explain. I simply existed separately. And then the invitation arrived. It came by courier, not mail. A heavy cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. I opened it at my kitchen island, the marble cool under my fingers. You are cordially invited to the Legacy Renovation Gala, celebrating the restoration of the historic Miller brownstone. Honoring Sarah Miller, the visionary who funded our legacy. I stared at the card. The font was elegant script. The paper was thick, expensive, and the lie was printed right there in the center, bold and undeniable. Honoring Sarah. I felt a cold prickle of heat start at the base of my neck. It wasn't anger. It was fascination. I was looking at a specimen of pure, unadulterated delusion. They were throwing a party to celebrate the renovation of the house. The renovation I had paid for. The new roof, the updated kitchen, the landscaped garden, every single invoice had been covered by my mortgage contributions. And they were crediting Sarah. Sarah, who lived in a loft downtown and leased a Range Rover she couldn't afford. Sarah, who had never paid a utility bill in her life. Sarah, the visionary. I walked to the window holding the invitation. The city lights blurred below me. I understood then. They had to do this. It wasn't just a lie to impress their friends. It was a structural necessity. My parents' entire identity was built on the idea that they were a successful, cultured family who produced successful, cultured children. Sarah, beautiful, charming, social, fit that image. She was the product they wanted to sell. I was the back-end code. Essential, but invisible. If they admitted that I, the quiet, awkward, unambitious daughter, was the one keeping the lights on, their entire brand would collapse. It would mean admitting that charm doesn't pay bills. It would mean admitting that their golden child was a hollow asset. So they rewrote reality. They simply reassigned the credit. In their minds, Sarah deserved the credit because she looked the part. It was a cognitive survival mechanism. They were gaslighting themselves to avoid the shame of needing me. I looked down at the RSVP card. Will you attend? Most people would have burned the invitation. They would have blocked the family forever and moved on. But I am a data analyst. When I see a discrepancy this large, I don't ignore it. I investigate. I pulled out my phone. I texted the number on the card. I'll be there. I wasn't going as a daughter. I wasn't going as a guest. I was going as an auditor. And I was bringing the receipts. The night before the gala, I conducted a forensic audit of my own history. I sat in my home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the room. I still had view-only access to the joint checking account my parents had opened for me when I was 16, the hub through which my monthly transfers had flowed before being dispersed. They had likely forgotten I had the password. They weren't detail-oriented people. That was my job. I pulled up the transaction history for the last 3 years. I filtered by outgoing payments. There was the mortgage payment to the bank. First National Mortgage, $1,850. I frowned. I stopped typing. $1,850. I had been sending $2,350. I leaned back in my chair, the ergonomic mesh cool against my spine. $500. Every single month. For 42 months. That was a $21,000 discrepancy. Where did it go? I traced the surplus. Every month, on the third 2 days after my deposit hit, there was a secondary transfer. Zelle to SPR Ventures. I typed SPR Ventures into the Massachusetts Business Registry database. Entity name Sarah's PR, Ventures LLC. Registered agent Sarah Miller. Principal office 420 State Street Loft. 4B. The room went silent. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to stop. They hadn't just overcharged me. They hadn't just skimmed off the top for groceries or utilities. They had taxed me. My parents had levied a usage fee on my existence and funneled it directly into Sarah's startup capital. I wasn't just paying for the roof over their heads. I was paying for the lease on Sarah's downtown loft. I was paying for her website hosting. I was paying for the latte art she posted on Instagram. I had been the angel investor for a sister who treated me like a bad intern. I felt a laugh claw its way up my throat, jagged and dark. It made perfect sense. In their ecosystem, resources flowed from the worker me to the talent Sarah. I was the extraction colony. She was the empire. They didn't see it as theft. They probably saw it as wealth redistribution within the family unit. I didn't need the money. I didn't have a brand to build. Sarah did. I looked at the invitation on my desk. Honoring the visionary. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Let's look at the vision. I didn't go to sleep. Instead, I opened a new terminal window. I knew the venue they rented, the Harborview Loft. I knew the AV company they hired. Because Sarah had tagged them in a pre-event hype post 3 days ago. So excited to work with at Lux Audiovisual for the big reveal. I went to Lux Audiovisual's website. I found their client portal. I didn't hack it. I didn't have to. Sarah, in her infinite need for validation, had posted a photo of the tech setup on her story, zooming in on the control tablet. The Wi-Fi network name and the guest upload code for the digital photo frames were visible in the background, written on a whiteboard. Network Lux event. Guest code Legacy 2024. It was almost insulting how easy it was. They lived their lives in public, convinced that visibility was power. They didn't realize that visibility is also a vulnerability. I wrote a script. A simple sequence of commands that would override the playlist on the venue's local server. I prepared my files. I didn't choose embarrassing baby photos. I didn't choose unflattering angles. I chose high-resolution PDFs, bank statements, entity registrations, transfer logs. I arranged them into a presentation. I titled it The True Ledger. I saved it to my phone. When I finally stood up, my legs were stiff, but my mind was crystal clear. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot. It burns out. This was cold. This was liquid nitrogen. I walked to my closet and pulled out a dress I had bought the day I moved in, a sharp architectural black sheath that looked like armor. It was time to audit the family business. The Harborview loft was designed to impress. Exposed brick floor to ceiling windows and enough white floral arrangements to bury a small country. I walked in at 7:15 in the evening. The room was already full. My parents were holding court near the bar, clinking glasses with their neighbors from Brookline. Sarah was in the center of the room, a ring light set up in front of her, live streaming to her 50,000 followers. "We are just so blessed," I heard her say to the phone screen, her voice pitched high and breathless. "To be able to restore this home, it's about honoring where we come from." I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray and moved to the back of the room near the AV booth. Nobody noticed me. Why would they? I was part of the background noise, like the HVAC system or the catering staff. Essential for operation but invisible to the guests. I watched my mother hug a woman in pearls. "Oh, Sarah did it all," she gushed. "She just has such a mind for design. And the financial discipline, we're so proud." I took a sip of champagne. It was crisp and cold. I pulled out my phone. I connected to the guest network. I entered the code. Access granted. I located the playlist currently running on the 12 large digital screens mounted around the room. It was a loop of renovation photos before and after. Sarah pointing at blueprints. Sarah wearing a hard hat, pink naturally. I selected my file, the True Ledger. I hovered my thumb over the Force Update button. "Ladies and gentlemen." My father's voice boomed over the microphone. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted. Sarah adjusted her ring light so it captured both her and Dad. "If everyone could raise a glass," my father said, his face flushed with pride and expensive scotch. "Tonight is about legacy. It's about the future. But mostly it's about gratitude." He turned to Sarah. "To my daughter Sarah, who stepped up when things were hard, who used her own success to secure our family's history. To the visionary who funded this legacy." To Sarah, the room chorused. Sarah beamed, blowing a kiss to the camera phone, streaming live to the internet. "Thank you, Daddy," she squeaked. "I just wanted to give back." I tapped the screen. Execute. The room flickered. On all 12 screens, the photo of Sarah in a hard hat vanished. In its place, a high-contrast black and white bank statement appeared. It was blown up to 60 inches. From Savannah Miller. Amount $2,350. Date January 3rd, 2021. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People squinted. Was this modern art? The screen shifted. Another statement. February, March, April. Then the graph appeared. A bright red bar chart. 2 columns. Column left, Savannah's contribution, $98,500. Column right, Sarah's contribution, $0. The murmur turned into a gasp. Then the kill shot. The screen displayed the transfer log. From Mom and Dad joint account. To SPR Ventures. Amount $500. Mimo Business Starter Fund. Beneath it, I had added a single line of text in bold font: Net loss, Savannah. Net profit, Sarah. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum. Sarah froze. Her eyes were glued to the screen behind her father. On her phone, the live stream comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur. Wait, is she stealing from her sister? Look at the receipts. Who is Savannah? My father lowered his glass. He looked at the screen, then at Sarah, then frantically around the room. Turn it off, he hissed at the AV guy. Cut the feed. The AV kid was frantically tapping his console. I can't, it's locked out, someone overrode the system. Sarah lunged for her phone to end the stream, but she fumbled it in her panic. It clattered to the floor camera facing up, still broadcasting the ceiling and the chaos. This is a mistake, my mother shrieked, her social grace disintegrating instantly. This is a hack, someone is trying to sabotage us. I stepped forward from the shadows. I walked into the center of the room, the heels of my boots clicking on the polished concrete floor. It's not a hack, Mom, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence it carried to the rafters. It's an audit. My father whipped around. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, he didn't look past me. He looked terrified. Savannah, he choked out, what are you doing? I'm balancing the books, I said. I pointed to the screen where the $500 theft was currently glowing in high definition. You said Sarah funded the legacy. I'm just correcting the data. You're ruining your sister's night, my mother cried, grabbing Sarah, who was now hyperventilating. I didn't ruin anything, I said, holding up my phone to show the disconnect button I was about to press. I just made the ledger public. If the truth destroys her reputation, then she didn't have one to begin with. I pressed the button. The screens went black. The room stayed silent. I turned around and walked toward the exit. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked past the stunned neighbors, past the horrified clients, past the ruins of their carefully curated lie. I walked out into the cool night air of the seaport, took a deep breath of salt and gasoline, and finally fully exhaled. The fallout wasn't a conversation, it was a liquidation. In the business world, when a company is exposed for fraud, the market correction is swift and brutal. My family experienced a market crash in real time. By the time I woke up the next morning, the clip from the live stream had been shared thousands of times. Sarah's followers, the same ones she had cultivated with curated photos of her renovation, turned on her with the ferocity of a betrayed mob. They didn't hate her because she was broke. They hated her because she was a fraud. The internet loves a success story, but it loves an exposed grifter even more. Within 48 hours, Sarah's company was effectively bankrupt. Her 3 biggest clients dropped her, citing reputational risk. The irony was perfect. She had built a career on managing public perception, and she had just become a PR nightmare. My parents fared no better. The neighbors in Brookline, the ones they had tried so hard to impress with their legacy gala, stopped waving. The country club invites dried up. They were socially insolvent. Their currency had always been their image, and I had just devalued it to 0. 3 days later, my doorman buzzed me. Miss Miller, he said, his voice professional and detached. There is a Mr. and Mrs. Miller in the lobby. They say they're your parents. I looked at the video monitor on my wall. There they were. My father looked older, his shoulders slumped in his expensive coat. My mother was wearing sunglasses indoors, hiding eyes that I knew were red from crying. They looked small. Stripped of their narrative, they were just 2 people who had made bad investments. Do you want me to send them up? The doorman asked. No, I said. I'll speak to them through the intercom. I pressed the button. Savannah. My mother's voice crackled through the speaker, tinny and desperate. Savannah, please let us up. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, I said. The data was clear. It was a misunderstanding, she pleaded, clutching her purse like a shield. The money to Sarah. It was a loan. A family loan. We intended to pay you back once the business took off. You humiliated your sister for nothing. I leaned against the wall, watching their pixelated faces. Even now, in the wreckage of their own making, they were trying to cook the books. They were trying to reclassify theft as a loan after the audit had already closed. Loans have terms, Mom, I said, my voice steady. Loans have repayment schedules. Loans have consent. Theft has consequences. We're family, my father barked, trying to summon his old authority, but it fell flat against the steel and glass of my lobby. You don't treat family like a hostile takeover. I didn't take anything over, I replied. I just audited the books, and I found that the family business is insolvent. Savannah, please, my mother sobbed. We can fix this. We can start over. We just need... I already have, I said. I'm liquidating my emotional assets. I'm closing the account. Savannah. I released the button. The line went dead. I watched on the monitor as they stood there for a moment, confused, waiting for a response that wasn't coming. Then slowly they turned and walked out the revolving doors back into the cold reality they had tried so hard to avoid. I turned away from the screen and walked out onto my balcony. The air was crisp, smelling of salt and winter. Below me, the ships moved silently in the harbor, carrying cargo to distant places. The city hummed with the sound of commerce, of things being built and sold. I opened my laptop one last time. I pulled up the spreadsheet, the one that had documented every dollar, every slight, every moment of neglect. The invisible ledger I had carried for years. I didn't need it anymore. The debt was cleared. I selected all. Delete. I opened a new tab. I navigated to the website of a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, kids who didn't have a safety net, who had to be their own infrastructure. I set up a recurring monthly transfer, $2,350. It wasn't a tax this time, it was an investment. An investment in resilience. An investment in the future. I closed the laptop. I sat back and looked at the horizon. For the first time in my life, the ledger was balanced. My net worth wasn't just in the bank. It was right here in the silence, in the peace, in the absolute certainty that I was finally truly free.